Hi, I'm Dr. Sarah Yates, and I want to talk to you for just a few minutes about a manual. No one wants to read a manual. I even remember telling my family, that's not what you do with that type of book. It's not for reading. But the APA 7th edition is our guide for doctoral writing, and there are some very helpful things in this manual, and there are some chapters that you're going to want to read. I want to spend just a few minutes with you going over some topics to highlight them to help you in your scholarly writing. And so I would like to focus first of all on the sample paper on page 61. The student paper is the one that we will use for our writing at Southeastern University. And that sample on page 61 can be very helpful to you. You can see what your title page and your first, second, third, and even a reference page should look like if you're following the APA guidelines. Then I would like to switch over to chapter 4. Chapter 4 is on writing style and grammar, and it begins in my APA book on page 111. And I just want to go through a few topics that maybe you would like to highlight that you might want to put a little asterisk or a star by or underline in your book. Every doctoral student should have things marked in their APA manual. So when we went through the 6th edition, I had actual page numbers memorized. Like, oh, you can find this on this page. You can find this on this other page. But I don't refer to the manual as much now because I've been doing this for many years. And I have the tabs to kind of help me when I do need to go back and look at something. But I must admit, I think my 6th edition had far more tabs and underlines and highlights. But in chapter 4, starting on page 111, it really stresses the objective of scholarly writing, and that is that you want clear communication about whatever it is you're talking about, and you want it to be orderly and you want it to be concise. So just in that first sentence of chapter 4 alone, there are some key principles that you need to mark and you need to think about and ask yourself, is my writing clear? Is it orderly? Is it concise? And does it communicate in a impactful way? And so in the chapter, it says they're going to talk about 4 qualities of effective scholarly writing. So chapter 4 is a chapter that you're going to want to read, that you're going to want to highlight and mark, and also apply in your writing. So it says in chapter 4, they're looking for 4 qualities of scholarly writing. 1 is continuity, 1 is flow, and the other 2 are conciseness and clarity. So each one of those is talked about, that logical expression or continuity through your paper, that flow of cadence and words. All of those are important to make your text clear and smooth. And so as chapter 4 breaks down the different parts, you'll see that it talks about transition words. And transition words can help your text be smooth and clear, and it can also help get rid of some disjointed or choppy ideas. And so those are some key things that I highlighted in the transition section. Underneath that transition section, I also have an asterisk by that last paragraph that says use adverbs judiciously. You'll find in scholarly writing, it's not beautiful and creative. It's just actually scholarly, and sometimes it can be quite boring. But whenever I'm reading a student's paper and I see a lot of adjectives or adverbs, I'm like, they need to go back to chapter 4 and read about using those adjectives and adverbs sparingly, only when necessary. It also talks about just a string of nouns and how you need to untangle that string. So those are some important points right there at the beginning of chapter 4. The next section, 4.4, is about concise wording and also providing clarity in your writing. And so it talks about precise writing. A reader should know exactly what you mean. There shouldn't be any guessing in scholarly writing. And you can eliminate wordiness, words that just aren't needed, and also redundancy, a word that perhaps repeats something and is not needed. There's also a sentence in there I wanted to mark. Once I read a doctoral application. A student was wanting to be accepted into the doctoral program, and his paper had big words and long sentences and was not very clear. In fact, it was quite difficult to understand, and he could have gotten his point across with shorter, less complicated words and sentences. And it's not that I have a low reading level, it's just that scholarly writing needs to be easy to comprehend, and that is displayed in this section 4.4. If you'll count down to the fourth paragraph, short words and short sentences are easy to comprehend, and we need to be very deliberate and precise when we're writing. I don't know if the student thought that maybe to get into a doctoral program he had to have the most complicated and difficult to understand essay, or that he was going to impress whoever was reading it with big vocabulary words. But that's not what APA says about scholarly writing. So we need to be deliberate in our word choice, and we need to avoid words like I think, I feel. That's not acceptable in scholarly writing. So when I see students using those kind of words, I think, oh, they need to go back and reread Chapter 4 of the APA manual. Metaphors and figurative language are wonderful things to use when we're writing in English class or in literature class, but not in our scholarly writing. And so all of my English teachers and all of my friends out there who love to write creative writing, we don't get to do that in the doctoral program. So I had a lot to learn when I started the doctoral program about creative writing. So just trying to give you a little jump start there. There are actually some examples of words that you can delete to avoid wordiness and redundancy. I think that's a helpful section. And then there's a section on varying sentence length. So in other words, all your sentences don't need to be short, because then it would appear to be choppy writing, but they don't all have to be long either. So it talks about declarative sentences with simple common words are best used, but it's okay to throw in a longer sentence sometimes. We want some variety there in our sentence structure. It also talks about avoiding that creative tone and just being very scholarly. Imagine your reader when you're writing. And in the case of your scholarly writing, it's most often going to be one of the professors here at Southeastern University. And so you are writing so that that reader can clearly understand what you're trying to communicate. And along those same lines, if you're thinking about a professor in education, you don't have to describe and explain terms that are known to those of us in education, because you're writing, you're imagining your audience. However, if you're using something that's specific to your field of education, or maybe a new term, maybe that is something that you need to define and cite a definition for. I would encourage you to use your own words and not to use quotation marks because you're taking a direct quote. Instead, it's better to put the definition or the sentence in any part of your writing in your own words. You might say, oh, I can't say it as eloquently as this author, but I think that you can. It just takes a little bit of practice, and I welcome you to practice it in any of my classes or with any other professor for that matter, because we'd rather you take the words and put them in your own words, write your own sentence instead of copying someone else's sentences using direct quotes. That should be limited, and that goes for your entire doctoral writing journey. Oh, no contractions, no colloquialisms. Use precise, scholarly language. On page 117 in section 4.11, the APA manual talks about anthropomorphism. And one of the biggest examples of anthropomorphism is when students say, the study researched, or the study said. And I'm like, studies can't research, and studies can't talk. They can't say anything. So anthropomorphism is something that we naturally do in our daily language. We attribute abilities to some inanimate object quite often. I'm pretty famous for doing that because I have a very vivid imagination. However, in scholarly writing, it's not considered to be acceptable. So you may write that the results suggest something, but we don't want to say that the study said something. So anthropomorphism is definitely something that you want to avoid. So take a look at that section 4.11. This chapter also talks about active and passive voice, and active voice is always preferred. So the example is to say the patients took the medication orally. That would be active voice because the patients, the subject of the sentence, did the action. The patients took the medicine. It would be passive voice to say the medication was taken orally because the medication is the subject of that sentence, and yet it's not what did the action. The medicine was taken. And so we want to change that sentence around and say the patients took the medicine. And so active voice is when the subject of the sentence is actually doing the action or whatever the verb is. So active voice is always better. There are going to be a few times later on when you're writing about your own research when passive voice is just really hard to avoid. So it's not that it's totally legal, but you definitely want to start with focusing on using active voice. And if you set Word up correctly on your computer, and if you also use Grammarly, it will help you identify when you've written something in passive voice. And that's a great tool for learning. And it's also a great tool to save yourself some points on your assignments. So under Word, under proofreading, you want to be sure that you've marked all of the categories under scholarly and precise wording. And you also want to be sure that you're using Grammarly, even if it's just the free version. It will help you with your writing. It will give you hints for better writing. Remember, Word and Grammarly are used also by our undergrad students. So that's just basic grammar and mechanic help that you might need, but it's not going to necessarily make your writing at the doctoral level or scholarly writing. So there's this journey of doctoral writing, and everyone starts in different places. Some of us have more practice in scholarly writing. Some of us are better grammarians than others. But when we start, the idea is that we're always moving forward, we're always making progress, and we're becoming better writers, and we're writing at a more scholarly level. And so that's what I want you to keep in mind is when you're reading feedback from your professor, what does that feedback say to you that you could do to improve your level of scholarly writing? There are also some other topics here, subject and verb agreement. That is important. Most of you already have a really good grasp on that by the time you come into a doctoral program. And then in section 416, there's a discussion of pronouns. Now, Southeastern trumps or overrides APA, and certain universities do that. We have APA that we follow. These are our guidelines for scholarly writing. But APA, in some instances, allows the use of pronouns. And at Southeastern University, we've established the rule that we do not accept first-person pronouns. So anything that's going to say I or we or us, anything that's got that first pronoun, we're not going to accept it. And so when I'm reading a paper and I come to a we, I'm like, what? We also do not allow second person pronouns, which would be the word you. So we want to take you out of any of our scholarly writing. So you can read there in section 416 and 417 about pronouns, but pronouns should not really be used in scholarly writing. And if you do use pronouns, you're using them sparingly, but never ever are we going to use a first or second pronoun in scholarly writing at Southeastern. So that's where our rule kind of trumps APA. The other thing that I'd like to point out about our rules may be differing a little bit from APA. In the 7th edition, you'll notice that it says you're going to use 12 point and it lists a couple of different fonts that you're allowed to use. At Southeastern University, we do everything in Roman or Times New Roman, and point size 12. And so that's the one other place where we deviate a little bit, because APA in the 7th edition allows you to use a few other fonts that are considered clear fonts, but we want all of our papers to match. And so we want you to stick with Times New Roman point size 12. So just a little overview of chapter 4. There's some other great chapters as well, but I just wanted to highlight some of the things that you should be gleaning from chapter 4 as you read in your APA manual.